Welcome to Bhaktivedanta Ashram at Govardhana Hill, ISKCON. And thanks for joining in the live studio audience, and thanks everyone who's joined us online. We're reading from the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, Canto 3, and we're up to Chapter 4. We'll be reading, Krishna willing, the whole canto in the next several days, depending on how you define several. And right now we're in the chapter entitled Vidura approaches Maitreya. And if I'm not incorrect, we're starting up at text number 29. So that's 3.429. Shukadeva Goswami replied, "My dear king, the cursing of the Brahmanas was only a plea, but the actual fact was the supreme desire of the Lord. He wanted to disappear from the face of the earth after dispatching his excessively numerous family members. He thought to himself as follows." Purport. In this verse, the word tyakshan is very significant in relation to Lord Sri Krishna's leaving his body. Since he is the eternal form of existence, knowledge and bliss, his body and his self are identical. Therefore, how is it possible that he would leave his body and then disappear from the vision of the world? There is a great controversy amongst the non-devotees or Mayavadis about the mysterious disappearance of the Lord, and the doubts of those men with a poor fund of knowledge have been very elaborately cleared by Srila Jiva Goswami in his Krishna Sandarbha. According to Brahma Samhita, the Lord has many forms. It is stated therein that the Lord has innumerable forms, and when he appears within the vision of the living entities, as Lord Krishna actually appeared, all such forms amalgamate with him. Besides all these infallible forms, he has his universal form, as manifested before Arjuna on the battlefield of Kurukshetra. Here in this verse, the word spitam is also used, which indicates that he left his gigantic universal form called the Virat Rupa, not his primeval eternal form, because there is hardly any possibility of his changing his form of Sakchit Ananda. This simple understanding is at once realized by the devotees of the Lord, but those who are non-devotees, who perform hardly any devotional service to the Lord, either do not understand this simple fact or purposefully raise a controversy to defeat the eternity of the transcendental body of the Lord. This is due to the defect called the cheating propensity of the imperfect living entities. By practical experience also it is seen up to the present day that the Lord's transcendental form is worshipped by devotees in different temples, and all the devotees of the Lord factually realize that the form of the deity in the temple is non-different from the form of the Lord. This inconceivable performance of the internal potency of the Lord is described in Bhagavad-gītā 7.25. Naham prakasha sarvasya yoga maya samavrataha. The Lord reserves the right of not being exposed to everyone. In the Padma Purana it is said, Atashri Krishna namadi nabhaved grahyam indriyai. The name and form of the Lord cannot be perceived by the material senses, but when he appears within the vision of the mundane people, he assumes the form of the Virat Rupa. This is an additional material exhibition of form and is supported by the logic of a subject and its adjectives. In grammar, when an adjective is taken away from the subject it modifies does not change. Similarly, when the Lord quits his Virat Rupa, his eternal form does not change, although there is no material difference between himself and any one of his innumerable forms. In the 5th canto it will be seen how the Lord is worshipped in different planets in his different forms, even now, and how he is worshipped in different temples of this earth also. Srila Jiva Goswami and Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur have very elaborately explained this incident of the Lord's disappearance in their commentaries, quoting various authentic versions of Vedic literatures. We purposely do not include them all here to avoid an increase in the volume of this book. The entire matter is explained in Bhagavad-gītā as quoted above. The Lord reserves the right of not being exposed to everyone. He always keeps himself out of the vision of the non-devotees, who are devoid of love and devotion, and thus he puts them still further away from the Lord. The Lord appeared on the invitation of Brahma, who prayed before the Kshirakshai Vishnu, and therefore, when the Lord appeared, all the forms of Vishnu amalgamated with him, and when the mission was fulfilled, all of them disintegrated from him in the usual course. It's funny, that word disintegrated. It's more, in this context of that sentence, I would pronounce it disintegrated instead of disintegrated, if you see what I'm saying. A disintegration, just in general, is taken of something falling apart, but if you look at the words disintegration, they're integrated and then they're not. Like non-application of the conglomerating process. That's in Brahma Samhita. The world gets conglomerated by the glance of Lord Vishnu, but then by the reverse process, it all gets unconglomerated and goes back to its original neutral state. Now I shall leave the vision of this mundane world, and I see that Uddhava, the foremost of my devotees, is the only one who can be directly entrusted with knowledge about me. Purport: Jnana Mud Ashrayam is significant in this verse. Transcendental knowledge has three departmental divisions, namely knowledge of impersonal Brahman, knowledge of the all-pervading Supersoul, and knowledge of the personality of Godhead. Out of the three, transcendental knowledge of the personality of Godhead has special significance and is known as Bhagavat Tattva Vijnana, specific knowledge of the personality of Godhead. This specific knowledge is realized by pure devotees, by pure devotional service, and no other means. Bhagavad-gītā 18:55 confirms this. Bhaktya mam abhijanati yavan yash chasmi tattvatah. Only persons engaged in devotional service can factually know the transcendental position of the Lord. Uddhava was considered to be the best amongst all devotees of that time, and therefore he was directly instructed by the Lord's grace, so that people might take advantage of Uddhava's knowledge after the disappearance of the Lord from the vision of the world. This is one of the reasons why Uddhava was advised to go to Badarika Ashram, where the Lord is personally represented by the Nara-Nārāyaṇa deity. One who is transcendently advanced can gain direct inspiration from the temple deity, and thus a devotee of the Lord always takes shelter of a recognized temple of the Lord in order to make tangible advancement in transcendental knowledge by the grace of the Lord. Uddhava is not inferior to me in any way because he is never affected by the modes of material nature. Therefore, he may remain in this world in order to disseminate specific knowledge of the personality of Godhead. Purport: the specific qualification for becoming the representative of the Lord is to be unaffected by the material modes of nature. The highest qualification of a person in the material world is to be a Brahmana. But since a Brahmana is in the mode of goodness, to be a Brahmana is not sufficient for becoming a representative of the Lord. One has to transcend the mode of goodness also and be situated in unalloyed goodness, unaffected by any of the qualities of material nature. This stage of transcendental qualification is called Shuddha-sattva, or Vasudeva, and in this stage the science of God can be realized. As the Lord is not affected by the modes of material nature, so a pure devotee of the Lord is also not affected by the modes of nature. That is the primary qualification for being one with the Lord. A person who is able to attain this transcendental qualification is called Jivan Mukta, or liberated even though he is apparently in material conditions. This liberation is achieved by one who constantly engages in the transcendental loving service of the Lord. In Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu 1-187 it is stated, Iha yasya harer dasye karmana manasa gira nikilasya yavastastu jivan muktasu uchate. Anyone who, by his actions, mind, and words, lives only for the transcendental loving service of the Lord is certainly a liberated soul, even though he may appear to be in a condition of material existence. Uddhava was in such a transcendental position, and thus he was selected to be the factual representative of the Lord in his bodily absence from the vision of the world. Such a devotee of the Lord is never affected by material strength, intelligence, or even renunciation. Such a devotee of the Lord can withstand all onslaughts of material nature, and therefore he is known as Goswami. Only such Goswamis can penetrate the mysteries of the Lord's transcendental loving relationships. 32. Shukadeva Goswami informed the king that Uddhava, being thus instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the source of all Vedic knowledge and the spiritual master of the three worlds, reached the pilgrimage site of Badarikashram and engaged himself there in trance to satisfy the Lord. Lord Sri Krishna is factually the spiritual master of the three worlds, and he is the original source of all Vedic knowledge. It is very difficult, however, to understand the personal feature of the Absolute Truth, even from the Vedas. His personal instructions are needed in order to understand the personality of Godhead as the Supreme Absolute Truth. Bhagavad-gītā is the evidence of such transcendental knowledge in gist. One cannot know the Supreme Lord unless one is graced by the Lord himself. Lord Krishna exhibited this specific mercy towards Arjuna and Uddhava while he was in the material world. Undoubtedly, Bhagavad-gītā was spoken by the Lord on the battlefield of Kurukshetra just to encourage Arjuna to fight, and yet to complete the transcendental knowledge of Bhagavad-gītā, the Lord instructed Uddhava. The Lord wanted Uddhava to fulfill his mission and disseminate knowledge which he had not spoken even in Bhagavad-gītā. Persons who are attached to the words of the Vedas may also know from this verse that the Lord is the source of all Vedic knowledge. One who is able to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one who is unable to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead by going through the pages of the Vedas may take shelter of one of the Lord's devotees, such as Uddhava, in order to advance further in knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Brahma Samhita says that it is very difficult to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead from the Vedas, but he is easily understood from a pure devotee like Uddhava. Taking mercy on the great sages who lived at Badarikashram, the Lord authorized Uddhava to speak on his behalf. Unless one has such authorization, one cannot understand or preach the devotional service of the Lord. While present on this earth, the Lord executed many uncommon activities, even traveling in space to bring down the Parijata from heaven and recovering the son of his teacher, Sandipani Muni, from the regions of death. Uddhava was certainly informed of the conditions of life on other planets, and all the sages were anxious to know of them, just as we are anxious to know about the planets in space. Uddhava was particularly deputed to carry a message to Badarikashram, not only to the sages of that place of pilgrimage, but also to the Nara-Nārāyaṇa deities. Such a message must have been more confidential than the knowledge described in the pages of the Vedas. The Lord is undoubtedly the source of all knowledge, and the messages dispatched through Uddhava to Nara-Nārāyaṇa and other sages were also part of the Vedic knowledge, but they were more confidential and could be sent or understood only through such a pure devotee as Uddhava. Since such confidential knowledge was known only to the Lord and Uddhava, it is said that Uddhava was as good as the Lord himself. Every living entity can, like Uddhava, also become a confidential messenger on the same level as the Lord, provided he becomes confidential himself by dint of loving devotional service. Such confidential knowledge is entrusted, as confirmed in Bhagavad-gītā, only to pure devotees like Uddhava and Arjuna, and one has to learn the mystery through them, and not otherwise. One cannot understand Bhagavad-gītā or Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam without the help of such confidential devotees of the Lord. According to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that confidential message must have concerned the mystery of his departure and the annihilation of his dynasty after the end of his appearance in the mundane world for 100 years. Everyone must have been very anxious to know about the mystery of the annihilation of the Yadu dynasty, and that message must have been explained by the Lord to Uddhava and dispatched to Badrikashram for the information of Nara-Nārāyaṇa and other pure devotees of the Lord. Vidura also heard from Uddhava about the appearance and disappearance of Lord Krishna, the Supersoul, in the mortal world, which is a subject matter sought after with great perseverance by the great sages. Purport: the subject matter of the appearance and disappearance of the Supersoul, Lord Sri Krishna, is a mystery even for the great sages. The word Paramatmanaha is significant in this verse. An ordinary living being is generally called the Atma, but Lord Krishna is never an ordinary living being because he is Paramatma, the Supersoul. Yet his appearance as one of the human beings and his disappearance again from the mortal world are subject matters for the research workers who execute research work with great perseverance. Such subject matters are certainly of increasing interest because the researchers have to search out the transcendental abode of the Lord, which he enters after finishing his pastimes in the mortal world. But even the great sages have no information that beyond the material world is the spiritual sky, where Sri Krishna eternally resides with his associates, although at the same time he exhibits his pastimes in the mortal world in all the universes one after another. This fact is confirmed in Brahma Samhita 537, Goloka eva nivasatya kilatama bhutaha. The Lord, by his inconceivable potency, resides in his eternal abode, Goloka, yet at the same time as the Supersoul, he is present everywhere, in both the spiritual and material skies, by his multi-varieties of manifestation. Therefore, his appearance and disappearance are simultaneously going on, and no one can say definitely which of them is the beginning and which is the end. His eternal pastimes have no beginning or end, and one has to learn of them from the pure devotee only, and not waste valuable time in so-called research work. Text number 34. The Lord's glorious acts and his acceptance of various transcendental forms for the performance of extraordinary pastimes in the mortal world are very difficult for anyone other than his devotees to understand. And for the beasts, they are simply a mental disturbance. Purport: the transcendental forms and pastimes of the Lord, as described in Bhagavad-gītā, are difficult subject matters for those who are not devotees to understand. The Lord never reveals himself to persons like the jnanis and yogis, and there are others who, because of their envying the Lord, from the bottom of their hearts are classified amongst the beasts. And for such envious beasts, the subject matter of the Lord's appearance and disappearance is simply a mental disturbance. As confirmed in Bhagavad-gītā 7.15, the miscreants who are simply concerned with material enjoyment, who work very hard like beasts of burden, can hardly know the personality of Godhead at any stage due to asurika bhava, or the spirit of revolt against the Supreme Lord. The transcendental bodily expansions manifested by the Lord for his pastimes in the mortal world, and the appearance and disappearance of such transcendental expansions are difficult subject matters, and those who are not devotees are advised not to discuss the Lord's appearance and disappearance, lest they commit further offenses at the lotus feet of the Lord. The more they discuss the transcendental appearance and disappearance of the Lord in the asuric spirit, the more they enter into the darkest region of hell, as stated in Bhagavad-gītā 16:20. Anyone who is against the transcendental loving service of the Lord is more or less a beastly creature, as confirmed in this verse of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Text 35. Understanding that he was remembered by Lord Krishna while quitting this world, Vidura began to cry loudly, overwhelmed by the ecstasy of love. Vidura was overwhelmed by the ecstasy of love when he understood that Lord Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, thought of him at the last moment. Although he thought of himself as insignificant, he was remembered by the Lord by his causeless mercy. Vidura accepted this as a great favor, and thus he cried. This crying is the last word in the progressive path of devotional service. One who can cry for the Lord in love is certainly successful in the line of devotional service. After passing a few days on the bank of the river Jamuna, Vidura, the self-realized soul, reached the bank of the Ganges, where the great sage Maitreya was situated. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the third canto, fourth chapter of the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, entitled Vidura Approaches Maitreya. Bravo! Bravissimo! Sadhu, sadhu! And now we'll take a few reflections or questions. Yes?
With regards to Vidura and his realization that the Lord remembered him, was this prompted by Uddhava mentioning that Maitreya was there and he heard everything? Like, what is it exactly that made Vidura feel?
It doesn't say exactly. It's implied only. I've looked many times and it doesn't, it just comes up in that verse. So it was obvious to me that it was within the conversation. He just told him, the Lord remembered you when he was leaving. Yes.
Was it that Uddhava was commissioned to Vidura? Did Krishna mention that to Uddhava? Go speak this to Vidura? Because there was an exchange between them, and then Uddhava, he sends him to Maitreya to hear from Maitreya, because Uddhava felt a little bit embarrassed to speak to Vidura, who was his senior, correct?
Vidura meeting with Uddhava was put to chance here. Is that what you're talking about, Vidura and Uddhava?
Yeah.
Because it was like the Lord's arrangement. There was no WhatsApp. It was they both ended up in Vrindavan and met there by chance. But in any case, it was all arranged by the Lord, and it doesn't say that, very specifically. If you go back and find that.
The verse?
Yeah, the smoking gun verse. Anyway, while you're looking, who else has a question?
I had something
go ahead.
related to that.
Please.
I was just remembering that first chapter of the 11th canto, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati gives these elaborate purports regarding the parallel between Krishna's departure and the character of Shamba and how that relates to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes and after the disappearance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. And in that, it mentions that the reason, although in the chapter before this, or at the end of that 11th canto chapter, the first chapter, there's mention that although Krishna could reverse the curse, he chose not to. And it was specifically to show that the misbehavior of Shamba towards the Vaishnavas and the Brahmanas cannot be tolerated. So in the same way, the example which Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati gives with Shamba is he comes dressed as a woman, and then he disrespects the Brahmanas. And Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati explains that this is in the line of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's pastimes, to be intolerant of the Sakhi-Beki, or all the apasampradayas, which arise after Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's disappearance. There's elaborate, many, many purports, but I just wanted to offer that.
Yeah, very nice. Very helpful.
Regarding this question about whether, of course, this meeting was signed in a sense by Krishna between Vidura and Uddhava, but in Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on the 6th verse in the 2nd chapter, he talks about Vidura going into trance again. And I can just read it from here.
Go ahead.
He says, a second time his trance was broken. He became amazed, utsmayan, by remembering the skill with which Krishna performed acts such as relieving the world of its burden. Or he burst into a smile by the soothing advice given by the Lord, who had said, O Uddhava, please return to answer the questions of Vidura. So Krishna's clearly in a transcendental WhatsApp, you could say.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to have a comment of appreciation for these purports. Srila Prabhupada, I think it was text 31, I highlighted, but he's pretty much establishing the authority and utmost preservation of the Bhagavad Parampara, and how Krishna is sanctioning Uddhava to speak this message on his behalf, and that he mentions here every living entity can, like Uddhava, also become a confidential messenger on the same level as the Lord, provided he becomes confidential himself by dint of loving devotional service. And that service, that loving devotional service, gets imparted to him by a Bhagavat, a person Bhagavat. So I was just really, I found that purport really, really beautiful and amazing. That Prabhupada's really showing the beauty and authority of the Bhagavad Parampara. Really nice.
Good point. Yes, Madhava.
In the previous verses we said, according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti, one second. Uddhava was particularly deputed to carry a message to Badrikashram, not only to the sages of that place of pilgrimage, but also to the Nara-Nārāyaṇa deities. And then later he says, according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, that confidential message must have concerned the mystery of his departure and the annihilation of his dynasty after the end of his appearance in the mundane world for 100 years. But Narayan is Krishna, and Arjuna knew that Krishna had left the world. So how come he sent the message to the Nara-Nārāyaṇa deities? This message.
Well, Balaram was also Krishna, and when he was in Vrindavan, when Krishna had killed Aghasura, Balaram didn't know what was going on until Krishna removed the Yogamaya from him. Thus, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, proving that he's the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So there's yes. Is it on the same subject?
It was on the same subject.
Go ahead.
It was just reflecting back on the point of this knowledge being revealed by confidential devotees. So Krishna has the right to maintain confidentiality even between his other incarnations of certain things which he may want to be exemplify this process of revealing through a confidential devotee.
Yeah, we find that Mahavishnu has a fascination with Krishna and Arjuna, so much so that he had arranged for a Brahmana to have his children stolen away. Every time the child was born, Mahavishnu was stealing them. No one knew what was happening. And then Arjuna vowed that he would stop it, and he couldn't. And he was about to enter into fire because he had made a vow. And then Krishna said, no, I'll take you where they are. And they went into the abode of Mahavishnu, and Mahavishnu there is fascinated. He said, I perpetrated this just so I could see you. So there is a sense of, although they're the same, there's a hierarchical system as well. Krishna's the Supreme Personality of God, and even Mahavishnu wants to see him. It just goes to the idea that, as you're saying, there can be differences within the oneness. There are differences. Or variety. Prabhupada said it. He said it is not difference, it is variety. Other reflections or questions? Anything from the outside people's party?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
When Vidura goes to Badrik Ashram to deliver this news, is there any indication of how the news was received by the sages in Badrik Ashram?
I don't have a recollection of that specific meeting, although, yeah, I can't say that I remember anything where they met together and they talked about it. Although I wouldn't have minded being there to hear. I mean, just recalling in this same vein, in the chapter of Prayers Personified Vedas, when Parikshit Maharaj asks Shukadeva Goswami about the means through which transcendental sound vibration could be transmitted through material apparati, there's a way in which they refer back to, Shukadeva refers back to conversations that took place previously between the four Kumaras and Nara-Nārāyaṇa Rishi, and even before that there was another conversation that preceded that one. The same question had been asked. They mentioned it goes back several generations. So it's not uncommon that Nara-Nārāyaṇa Rishi and other incarnations are discussing philosophy of the Lord because he's unlimited. You know, it's a topic that they discuss.
So what will be spoken by Maitreya Muni to Vidura is his recollection of Uddhava Gītā. Is that correct? The correct chronology?
What happens is when the demigods come into Dwarka, they, headed by Brahma, who were the ones that called him in the first place. At the beginning of the 10th canto, we find they go to the Milk Ocean and they chant Purush Sukta. And they say, Earth's really getting hacked up. Could you come and help? And he says, yes, I'll come. And you all come too. And it'll assist me. And then they go to Dwarka, Brahma and the demigods, and they tell Krishna, very similar thing as Advaita Acharya tells Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, there's enough rice in the marketplace. You've done your job. You know that time when he got a note from Advaita Acharya and Mahaprabhu said, oh, he calls the deity and now he tells the deity to go. And only Sarup Damodar could understand what he was saying or what the note meant. It was enigmatic. And he became a little quiet, morose. And others were saying, what does it mean? What does it mean? And Mahaprabhu just gave that comment. He calls the deity, asks him, go away. So when Brahma came, he told Krishna that now you've completed your Pritranaya Sadhanam Vinashaya Chaduskritam. You've completed it. It's okay. You've relieved the burden of the world. And because of that assembly there, Uddhava had an idea that he might be getting ready to leave. There's a lot of comings and goings of Brahma and all these demigods. So he asked the Lord, and the Lord revealed to him that, yes, I'm getting ready to wind up my pastimes. And there in Dwarka, he spoke the Uddhava-gītā to Uddhava. And then he told Uddhava that he should go to Badarika then. And Uddhava left for Badarika, but then when he was feeling separation, and he knew that the Lord was going to Prabhash, so he made a U-turn. And he came back, and that's the instance here where he meets him in the forest, where he's leaning against a banyan tree. And then Maitreya comes. So Uddhava-gītā is already spoken, but he's giving this these other instructions as well at this time. Yes?
I thought that Krishna shared Uddhava-gītā to both Maitreya and Uddhava, because otherwise, like I was thinking about the Maitreya, it was mentioned that he was not that of a great devotee and he had some mixed devotion. So I was wondering like why Vidura would question Maitreya, who was already a great devotee, and why would that be included in Bhagavatam? So, and I consoled my mind that because Krishna gave instruction to Maitreya and Uddhava, but now if we are saying that Uddhava-gītā was not spoken to Maitreya, then how is it that Vidura was a great devotee who was already a pure devotee would ask questions to Maitreya, who was a devotee?
Isn't that two different things? First of all, he did speak Uddhava-gītā in Dwarka before he left. But the second question is, why would he talk about confidential information when Maitreya was there and then entrust him to be the spiritual master of Vidura?
Yeah, why would he?
Why
would Vidura, who is a great devotee already, pure devotee, would ask Maitreya, which was mentioned in the Purports, that Maitreya was not, he was a devotee, but he had mixed devotion, like of jnana or something, and.
Well, he seems to have done okay. I mean, we're going to read it, and you'll see that the way he recounts it. I mean, it's a detail there about the different moods of the different devotees. But Maitreya was perfectly competent, as Uddhava also. He deferred to him. He wouldn't have deferred to him if there was something defective. It's just a different mood. That's all. Yes.
I believe it was also mentioned that upon entering into the association of Krishna and Uddhava, he came to realize the importance of approaching the Lord, and that might have been a shift in his mood at that point.
I mean, most definitely. Can you imagine? You walking along, and next thing you know, Krishna's there talking to Vidura, and you get to sit behind.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Vidura was very elderly. Wasn't he initiated sometime during his life? And so Maitreya was one of his Shiksha gurus. Is that correct, or is that a wrong assumption? Because Vidura must have met so many sadhus and saintly persons in his life. There's no mention about Diksha or Shiksha or all that.
No. No mention. Yes?
In this section, 3rd into 4th chapter, verse number 21, where Purport, Prabhupada says that Uddhava's separation from Lord was unbearable. Therefore, he started to Badrika Ashram in obedience to Lord's order, because the order of the Lord and Lord himself are identical. As long as one is engaged in the execution of the order of the Lord, there is no factual separation from him. So I was remembering that the same theme goes in the different cantos, even in the 2nd canto, 9th chapter, verse number 34, where the verse that you say is Pratiyeta Tadvid the Chatusloki Bhagavatam, where you say that order of the Lord is when someone follows like instruction is as, and that is the direct mean to see the Lord. And even in the fourth canto in the Puranjan section, we know that when there's in the 28th chapter when Shiva was able to die to the in the fire pit, and then Prabhupada says in the purport, like if in the absence of the spiritual master, the disciple should take the word as honor and he should ready to die if he's not able to execute the instructions. I was just saying that the theme continues in different sections.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the power of the order of the spiritual master or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That quotation, it's one of my favorite quotations from the second canto. It's one of my favorite quotations, which is it's in the second canto, where he says that the order of the Supreme Personality of God is a manifestation of his internal potency. It is by that particular potency that one comes to see the Lord face to face. Radhakripa Prabhu.
Guru Maharaj, I was really fascinated by all the conversation which is happening in the Bhagavatam. There was no self-help book, where if there is somebody question, he said, I went and looked into my closet and opened the book, I got that answer. So they always approach the authority. It's very systematic, where there is a knowledge is revealed, and as you approach the one who has that knowledge. So I think the WhatsApp universities or the Google Devtas are all creating mess in the current environment where we are living. So it's very important we stick to the basics to approach those who have that knowledge and submissively help, beg for the knowledge to receive it. So it's very fascinating to me.
Yeah. Anything else from outside?
Guru Maharaj, is Bhadrika Ashram in Badrinath? The reason for my question is last month I was in Badrinath, and there is two mountains, Nar and Narayan, and Badrinath temple is nestled between those two mountains. So I was just wondering.
Did you see Nara-Nārāyaṇa Rishi?
No, those were
I've
the
never
two
been there.
mountains.
I've not been up that far.
Yeah, there are two mountains, and the main temple of Badrinath is in the middle. It's like a valley, and it's Badrinath temple is in the middle.
Has anybody else been there? Well, we can inquire from somebody that's been there. Are you asking a question?
Yeah, my question is Bhadrika Ashram and Badrinath same place?
Is Badrinath and Badrikashram the same place? Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
What? I see. Okay. Like there's Tirupati and Tirumala. Okay. I'm going to start chapter 5 because nobody can stop us. Chapter 5, Vidura's talks with Maitreya. Shukadeva Goswami said, Vidura, the best amongst the Kuru dynasty, who was perfect in devotional service to the Lord, thus reached the source of the celestial Ganges river, Hardwar, where Maitreya, the great fathomless, learned sage of the world, was seated. Vidura, who was perfect in gentleness and satisfied in transcendence, inquired from him. Vidura was already perfect due to his unalloyed devotion to the infallible Lord. The Lord and the living entities are all qualitatively the same by nature, but the Lord is qualitatively much greater than any individual living entity. He is ever infallible, whereas the living entities are prone to fall under the illusory energy. Vidura had already surpassed the fallible nature of the living entity in conditional life due to his being achyutabhava, or legitimately absorbed in the devotional service of the Lord. I'm going to read that sentence again because it seems important. Vidura had already surpassed the fallible nature of the living entity in conditional life due to his being a chuta bhava, or legitimately absorbed in the devotional service of the Lord. This stage of life is called the chuta bhava siddha, or perfection by dint of devotional service. Anyone, therefore, who is absorbed in the devotional service of the Lord is a liberated soul and has all admirable qualities. The learned sage Maitreya was sitting in a solitary place on the bank of the Ganges at Hardwar in Vidura, who was a perfect devotee of the Lord and possessed all good transcendental qualities, approached him for inquiry. Vidura said, "O great sage, everyone in this world engages in fruitive activities to attain happiness, but one finds neither satisfaction nor the mitigation of distress. On the contrary, one is only aggravated by such activities. Please, therefore, give us directions on how one should live for real happiness." Vidura asked Maitreya some common questions, which was not originally his intention. Uddhava asked Vidura to approach Maitreya Muni and inquire into all the truths concerning the Lord, his name, fame, quality, form, pastimes, entourage, etc. And thus when Vidura approached Maitreya, he should have asked only about the Lord, but out of natural humility, he did not immediately ask about the Lord, but inquired into a subject which would be of great importance to the common man. A common man cannot understand the Lord. He must first know the real position of his life under the influence of the illusory energy. In illusion, one thinks that he can be happy only by fruitive activities. But what actually happens is that one becomes more and more entangled in the network of action and reaction and does not find any solution to the problem of life. There is a nice song in this connection, quote, "Because of a great desire to have all happiness in life, I built this house. But unfortunately, the whole scheme has turned to ashes because the house was unexpectedly set on fire." The law of nature is like that. Everyone tries to become happy by planning in the material world, but the law of nature is so cruel that it sets fire to one's schemes. The fruitive worker is not happy in his schemes, nor is there any satiation of his continuous hankering for happiness. O my Lord, great philanthropic souls travel on the earth on behalf of the Supreme Personality of Godhead to show compassion to the fallen souls who are averse to the sense of subordination to the Lord. To be obedient to the wishes of the Supreme Lord is the natural position of every living entity. But due only to past misdeeds, a living being becomes averse to the sense of subordination to the Lord and suffers all the miseries of material existence. No one has anything to do but render devotional service to the Supreme Lord, Sri Krishna. Therefore, any activity other than transcendental loving service to the Lord is more or less a rebellious action against the Supreme Will. All fruitive activity, empirical philosophy, and mysticism are more or less against the sense of subordination to the Lord. And any living entity engaged in such rebellious activity is more or less condemned by the laws of material nature, which work under the subordination of the Lord. Great unalloyed devotees of the Lord are compassionate towards the fallen, and therefore they travel all over the world with the mission of bringing souls back to Godhead, back to home. Such pure devotees of the Lord carry the message of Godhead in order to deliver the fallen souls, and therefore the common man who is bewildered by the influence of the external energy of the Lord should avail himself of their association. 4. Therefore, O great sage, please give me instruction on the transcendental devotional service of the Lord, so that he who is situated in the heart of everyone can be pleased to impart from within knowledge of the Absolute Truth in terms of the ancient Vedic principles delivered only to those who are purified by the process of devotional service. Purport. As already explained in the first canto of Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, the Absolute Truth is realized in 3 different phases, although they are one and the same, in terms of the knower's capacity to understand. The most capable transcendentalist is the pure devotee of the Lord, who is without any tinge of fruit of actions or philosophical speculation. By devotional service only does one's heart become completely purified from all material coverings like karma, jnana, and yoga. Only in such a purified stage does the Lord, who is seated in everyone's heart with the individual soul, give instruction so that the devotee can reach the ultimate destination of going back home, back to Godhead. This is confirmed in Bhagavad-gītā 10:10. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajatam. Only when the Lord is satisfied with the devotional service of the devotee does he impart knowledge, as he did for Arjuna and Uddhava. The jnanis, yogis, and karmis cannot expect this direct cooperation of the Lord. They are not able to satisfy the Lord by transcendental loving service, nor do they believe in such service to the Lord. The bhakti process, as performed under the regulative principles of Vaidhi bhakti, or devotional service, following the prescribed rules and regulations, is defined by the revealed scriptures and confirmed by great acharyas. This practice can help the neophyte devotee to rise to the stage of rag bhakti, in which the Lord responds from within as the Chaitya Guru, or the spiritual master as super consciousness. All transcendentalists, other than devotees, make no distinction between the individual soul and the super soul, because they miscalculate the super consciousness and the individual consciousness to be one and the same. Such miscalculation by the non-devotees makes them unfit to receive any direction from within, and therefore they are bereft of the direct cooperation of the Lord. After many, many births, when such a non-dualist comes to sense that the Lord is worshipable and that the devotee is simultaneously one with and different from the Lord, then only can he surrender unto the Lord Vasudeva. Pure devotional service begins from that point. The process of understanding the Absolute Truth adopted by the misguided non-dualist is very difficult, whereas the devotee's way of understanding the Absolute Truth comes directly from the Lord, who is pleased by devotional service. On behalf of many neophyte devotees, Vidura, at the very first instance, inquired from Maitreya about the path of devotional service by which the Lord, who is seated within the heart, can be pleased. 5. O great sage, kindly narrate how the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the independent, desireless Lord of the 3 worlds, and the controller of all energies, accepts incarnations and creates the cosmic manifestation with perfectly arranged regulative principles for its maintenance. Purport. Lord Krishna is the original personality of Godhead, from whom the 3 creative incarnations, namely the Purusha avatars, Karnadakshayi Vishnu, Karana Vashayi Vishnu, Garbhadakshayi Vishnu, and Shiradakshayi Vishnu, expand. The whole material creation is conducted by the 3 Purushas in successive stages under the external energy of the Lord. And thus, material nature is controlled by him. Thinking material nature to be independent is like seeking milk from the nipple-like bags on the neck of a goat. The Lord is independent and desireless. He does not create the material world for his own satisfaction, as we create our household affairs to fulfill our material desires. Actually, the material world is created for the illusory enjoyment of the conditioned souls, who have been against the transcendental service of the Lord since time immemorial. But the material universes are full in themselves. There is no scarcity for maintenance in the material world because of their poor fund of knowledge. The materialists are disturbed when there is an apparent increase of population on the earth. Whenever there is a living being on the earth, however, his subsistence is immediately arranged by the Lord. The other species of living entities, who far outnumber human society, are never disturbed for maintenance. They are never seen dying of starvation. It is only human society that is disturbed about the food situation, and to cover up the real fact of administrative mismanagement, takes shelter in the plea that the population is excessively increasing. If there is any scarcity in the world, it is the scarcity of God consciousness. Otherwise, by the grace of the Lord, there is no scarcity of anything. It's time for the cow break. So, if you come back at 20 after, please, and we'll start up again. Gaur Premanande.